A thin layer of frost clung to the inside of the train car, tracing delicate patterns like veins across the glass. At exactly 35 degrees below zero, even breath felt heavy, as if the air itself resisted being disturbed. Armin pressed his palm against the metal wall and quickly pulled it back. The cold wasn't just outside. It seeped into everything, into the bolts, the wood, the silence. The moment still replayed in his mind. The platform, the shouting, the suddenness of it all. One decision. One wrong place at the wrong time, and his life had been packed into a single rail car and pushed into the endless white. He hadn't cried then, not when the train jerked forward, not when the city disappeared behind a curtain of snow, not even when he realized no one was coming after him. Now, days later, the silence felt louder than anything he had left behind. The train car wasn't meant for living. It had once carried livestock, maybe machinery. Now it carried him. A narrow iron stove in the corner struggled to stay alive, fed by scraps of wood he rationed carefully. Every piece mattered. Every flame was a small rebellion against the cold try to claim him. At night, the wind would rise like a living thing, slamming against the walls, howling through cracks. The entire car would tremble, as if the storm wanted inside. Armin learned quickly. Don't waste movement, don't waste heat, don't waste hope. Hope, especially, was expensive here. He marked the days by scratching lines into wood near the door. At first, he counted carefully. Then the lines blurred together. Time lost its shape. Morning and night became suggestions rather than truths. Food came irregularly. Sometimes a guard would open the door, toss in a sack, and leave without a word. Other times, nothing came at all, and Armin had to make what little he had stretched further than it should. Hunger sharpened his thoughts at first. Then it dulled them. He began to remember things he hadn't thought about in years. His mother's voice calling him inside before dark. The smell of tea steeping too long. The warmth of a crowded room. Warmth felt like a fantasy now. One evening, as the sky outside turned a deep, endless blue, Armin noticed something unusual. The train wasn't moving. It had stopped before, but this felt different. There was no jolt, no sound of brakes. Just stillness. He waited. Minutes passed. Then more. The silence pressed in, thick and unnatural. He stood slowly, joint stiff, and walked to the small sliver window. Outside, nothing but snow stretching in every direction. No station. No lights. Just emptiness. A strange unease settled in his chest. Why stop here? He returned to the stove, feeding it a small piece of wood. The flame flickered weakly, casting shadows that seemed to shift too slowly, too deliberately. Then it came. A sound. Not the wind. Not the creak of metal. A knock. Soft. Measured. Armin froze. For a moment, he thought he had imagined it. The cold did strange things to the mind. Made you hear what wasn't there. Then it came again. 3 knocks. Clear. Certain. His throat tightened. No one knocked here. Guards shouted. They banged. They never knocked. He took a step toward the door, heart pounding louder than the storm had ever been. Who's there? He called, his voice rough from disuse. No answer. Only the silence pressing harder now, as if waiting. Another knock. This time, slower. Armin's hand hovered near the latch. Every instinct told him to step back, to ignore it, to pretend he hadn't heard anything. But something else, something deeper, pulled him forward. He hadn't heard another human gesture in days. Not kindness, not curiosity, not anything resembling normal life. Just that knock. He slid the latch open. The door resisted at first, frozen shut. He pushed harder until it gave way with a sharp crack, letting in a rush of air so cold it burned his lungs. Outside stood a figure. Not a guard. Not dressed for the cold. At least not properly. A long coat, dusted with snow, but no hat, no gloves. The person's face was partially shadowed, but their eyes caught the faint light from inside the car. Calm, unafraid. "May I come in?" the stranger asked. The voice was steady, almost gentle. Armin stared, unsure if this was real. No one traveled out here alone. No one survived long enough to knock politely on doors in the middle of nowhere. "You'll freeze," Armin said finally, stepping aside. The stranger entered without hesitation, closing the door behind them. The temperature inside the car seemed to shift, not warmer, but different, less oppressive. They moved toward the stove, extending their hands toward the weak flame. "You've done well," the stranger said, glancing around the cramped space. Armin frowned. "Do I know you?" The stranger smiled faintly, but didn't answer directly. "Not yet," they said. Something about the words unsettled him. "Where did you come from?" Armin pressed. "From where you were," the stranger replied. "That doesn't make sense." "It will." Armin's chest tightened. "Are you with them?" "A guard." The strangers shook their head. "No, I'm here because of the moment." "The moment? The one that brought you here." Armin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Everyone had a story about how they ended up in exile. Some lied, some exaggerated, some refused to speak of it at all. Armin had replayed his moment endlessly. The argument, the accusation, the silence that followed. "I didn't do what they said," he muttered. "I know," the stranger said. The certainty in their voice was immediate, absolute. Armin looked up sharply. "How could you know that?" The stranger met his gaze, eyes reflecting the flickering flame. "Because I was there," they said quietly. The air seemed to stop moving. Armin's mind raced. That was impossible. He remembered every face, every voice. This person had not been there. "I would remember you," he said. The stranger tilted their head slightly. "Not in the way you think." A long silence followed. Outside, the wind began to rise again, brushing against the walls like distant whispers. Armin felt something shift inside him. Not fear, not exactly. Something closer to recognition, but without understanding. "What do you want?" he asked. The stranger's expression softened. "To give you a choice," they said. Armin let out a short, humorless laugh. "A choice? Out here?" "Yes." "There are no choices here. That's the point." The stranger stepped closer, the faint light revealing more of their face. It looked familiar, not in a clear way, but like a memory he couldn't quite place. "There's always a moment," the stranger said. "And sometimes, if you're willing to see it, there's more than one path out of it." Armin shook his head. "You're talking in circles." "Am I?" the stranger asked gently. "Or are you afraid to look at what really happened?" The words struck deeper than he expected. "I know what happened," Armin snapped. "Do you?" Silence again. The stranger reached into their coat and pulled out something small. They held it out in their palm. A watch. Old. Worn. The glass cracked. Armin's breath caught. It was his. He had lost it the day everything changed. "That's not possible," he whispered. "Time doesn't always move forward," the stranger said. "Not when something important is left unresolved." Armin stared at the watch, then at the stranger. "Who are you?" he asked again, more quietly now. The stranger met his gaze, and for the first time there was something unmistakable in their eyes. Recognition. "I'm what's left of the life you didn't choose," they said. The stove flickered violently, casting wild shadows across the walls. Armin felt the world tilt just slightly. The train car, the cold, the exile, it all seemed suddenly fragile, like a thin layer over something much deeper. "And the knock?" Armin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The stranger's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "That was you," they said. And in that moment, the silence returned, but it no longer felt empty. Armin didn't move. The words hung in the air, heavier than the cold, heavier than the silence that had ruled his days. "That was you." He stared at the stranger, searching their face for any sign of deception, any crack in the calm certainty they carried. But there was none, only that unsettling familiarity, growing stronger by the second. "That doesn't make sense," Armin said slowly. "I've been here. I haven't left this car." The stranger turned the cracked watch over in their fingers, as if weighing time itself. "You haven't left," they agreed. "But that doesn't mean you haven't reached beyond it." Armin's chest tightened. "Stop talking like that. Just tell me what's going on." The stranger looked up, meeting his eyes with a quiet intensity. "You remember the moment," they said. "Not just the accusation. Not just the shouting. The exact second everything changed. Armin swallowed. Of course he remembered. It was the only thing he had left that still felt sharp, untouched by the dulling effect of days and the cold. It was in the office, he said slowly. They said I altered the records, that I took something that wasn't mine. And did you? No. The answer came instantly. Firm. Practiced. The stranger nodded, as if expecting it. That's what you've been telling yourself, they said. A flicker of irritation crossed Armin's face. Because it's true. Is it? The stranger asked gently. The question landed differently this time. Not like an accusation, but like an opening. Armin turned away, pacing the small length of the train car. The floor creaked under his boots. The stove crackled weakly behind him. I didn't steal anything, he repeated, but his voice had lost some of its edge. The stranger didn't respond immediately. Instead, they stepped close to the wall where Armin had scratched the tally marks. So many days, they murmured, and every one of them you replayed that moment exactly the same way. Armin stopped pacing. What are you saying? He asked. The stranger traced a finger along the scratch lines. I'm saying, they replied, that you've been remembering only what lets you survive. Armin felt something twist inside him. That's not how memory works. The stranger gave a small, almost sad smile. That's exactly how it works. Silence stretched between them again. Outside, the wind howled louder now, rattling the walls as if to try to break in. The train car groaned in response. Armin looked back at the stranger. If you're me or whatever you think you are, then say it clearly. The stranger turned to face him fully. I am you, they said. Not the you who was sent here. The you who made a different choice in that moment. Armin shook his head immediately. There was no choice. There was, the stranger said firmly, a small one, easy to ignore, easy to justify. Armin's breathing slowed, his mind racing. What choice? He demanded. The stranger stepped closer, holding out the cracked watch again. The second before they accused you, they said, when you noticed the error in the records. Armin froze. A flicker of memory. Quick, sharp, cut through the fog of repetition. A number, slightly off, a signature that didn't match. He had seen it, just for a moment. Armin hesitated. That doesn't matter. That wasn't. You ignored it, the stranger said quietly. Armin's jaw tightened. It wasn't my responsibility. No, the stranger agreed. It wasn't, but you saw it. The words felt like they were pressing against something buried deep inside him. I didn't think it would lead to this, Armin said, his voice lower now. Of course you didn't, the stranger replied. We rarely do. The use of we didn't go unnoticed. Armin looked down at his hands, rough and cracked from the cold. It was a small thing, he said. People overlook small things all the time. The stranger nodded. And sometimes small things become moments. The stove flickered again, weaker now. Armin glanced at it, then back at the stranger. So what are you saying? He asked. That all of this happened because I didn't speak up about mistake? I'm saying, the stranger replied, that the moment didn't start when they accused you. It started before that. Armin's mind churned. The office, the papers, the quiet hesitation. He had noticed something wrong. He had paused, and then he had moved on. It wasn't my fault, Armin said again, but this time it sounded more like a question. The stranger stepped even closer now, their presence almost mirroring his own. Fault isn't the point, they said. Choices. Armin felt the weight of those words settle heavily on his chest. If you're right, he said slowly, then what does it change? I'm still here. The train still brought me to this place. The stranger's expression shifted, something almost hopeful flickering beneath the surface. It changes everything, they said, because the moment isn't over. Armin frowned. What do you mean? The stranger held up the cracked watch. For you, time moved forward, they said. You were accused, sent away, locked into this path. They turned the watch slightly, revealing the frozen hands. But for me, they continued, time stopped right there, at the moment you chose not to act. Armin's pulse quickened. And now, he asked. The stranger met his gaze, unwavering. "Now the two paths have touched," they said. "That's why I'm here." A sudden gust of wind slammed against a train car, making the door shudder violently. Armin glanced at it, then back at the stranger. "So what happens next?" he asked. The stranger didn't answer immediately. Instead, they walked toward the door, placing a hand gently against it. "The knock," they said softly, "wasn't just a sound. It was an opportunity." Armin's throat went dry. Opportunity for what? The stranger looked over their shoulder. "To return to the moment," they said, "and choose differently." Armin felt his heart pound harder than it had since the day he was taken. "That's not possible." "It is," the stranger said simply, "but it comes with a cost." "Of course it does," Armin thought bitterly. "There's always a cost." The stranger nodded. "If you go back," they said, "this version of you, this life, this memory, everything you become here will disappear." Armin stared at them. "And if I don't?" The stranger's expression darkened slightly. "Then nothing changes," they said. "You stay here. The cold continues. The days blur. And eventually, even the moment fades." Armin looked around the train car. The scratch lines, the weak stove, the frost-covered walls. This was his reality. Harsh, unforgiving, but real. And yet, the memory of that office, of that tiny, overlooked detail, felt suddenly just as real. "I'd lose all of this?" he asked quietly. The stranger gave a small, almost ironic smile. "Yes." Armin let out a slow breath. For the first time since the knock, the silence didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a space waiting to be filled. "And you?" Armin asked. "What happens to you?" The stranger held his gaze. "I stop existing," they said. No hesitation, no fear, just fact. Armin felt a strange pull in his chest. "You're asking me to erase you." "I'm asking you to choose," the stranger corrected gently. Another long pause. The wind outside began to settle, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Armin stepped closer to the door. His hand hovered near it, just as it had before. Only now, everything felt different. Behind that door wasn't just the cold. It was the moment, and the choice he never made. Armin closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "Tell me exactly what I have to do," he said. The stranger's expression softened. "When you open the door," they said, "don't hesitate." Armin nodded slowly. His hand moved to the latch. The metal was freezing beneath his fingers. For a second, doubt flickered. Then he pulled, and the door opened into something that wasn't a frozen wasteland anymore. The cold was gone. Armin didn't feel the biting air, didn't hear the wind tearing against metal. Instead, there was a strange stillness, thick, quiet, almost weightless. For a brief moment, he thought he had gone blind. Everything around him was pale, undefined, like a memory not fully formed. Then shapes began to settle. Edges sharpened. Sound returned. A pen scratching against paper. Voices distant but familiar. Armin's breath caught. He was standing in the office. The same long table. The same scattered files. The same faint hum of overhead lights. Even the smell, ink, dust, stale air, was exactly as he remembered. Or perhaps more exact than he had ever allowed himself to remember. His heart started racing. "This is it," he whispered. "You're early." The stranger's voice came from behind him. Armin turned sharply. The stranger was still there, but different now, less solid, as if the world was beginning to forget them. "You shouldn't be able to see me here," they added quietly. "I can," Armin said. "So that means—" "It means the moment hasn't locked yet," the stranger interrupted. "But it will. Soon." Armin looked around again. Everything was moving, but slightly out of sync, like a scene replaying itself, waiting for him to step into it. At the far end of the table, he saw himself, not the version shaped by cold and exile, but the man from before, clean, composed, unaware of what was coming. That version of him flipped through a stack of documents, pausing briefly. Armin felt a jolt. "That's when I saw it," he said. "Yes," the stranger replied. The younger Armin frowned slightly, eyes lingering on a number, a small inconsistency, easy to miss. Armin took a step forward instinctively. "Wait," the stranger said. He stopped. "You don't replace him," the stranger explained. "You influence the moment." Armin's brows furrowed. "How?" "By choosing," the stranger said, clearly, without looking away this time. The room seemed to tighten, like a breath being held too long. Armin watched as his past self hesitated, just like before, the exact same pause. "This is it," Armin murmured. "Yes," the stranger said softly. "This is where everything split." Armin felt pressure building in his chest. In his memory, this had been nothing, a flicker, a passing thought. But now, standing here, it felt enormous, heavy, decisive. His past self shifted slightly, about to move on. "Do something," the stranger urged. Armin stepped closer, his voice catching in his throat. "Check it," he said. Nothing happened. His past self didn't react. Armin clenched his fists. "He can't hear me." "Not like that," the stranger said. "You're not here to speak. You're here to decide." "I am deciding." Armin snapped. "No," the stranger replied calmly. "You're still hesitating." The words hit harder than expected. Armin looked again at his past self. The slight doubt, the moment of awareness. And then he understood. This wasn't about words. It was about intention. About whether he would let that moment pass again. Armin closed his eyes for a brief second, steadying himself. Then, with everything in him, he focused, not on speaking, not on forcing, but on choosing. The room seemed to ripple. His past self froze, just for a fraction of a second longer than before. A subtle shift, barely noticeable, but different. The younger Armin looked back at the document, really looked this time. His brow furrowed deeper. Armin felt a surge of something. Fear, hope. He couldn't tell. "That's it," the stranger whispered. The younger Armin flipped back a page. Then another. His posture changed. Alert now. Aware. Armin's pulse pounded in his ears. "He sees it," he said. "Yes," the stranger replied. Across the room, a voice called out. "Everything all right there?" It was one of the supervisors. In the original memory, Armin had answered quickly, dismissively. "No problem," he had said, and that had been the end of it. But now, the younger Armin hesitated again. The question hung in the air. Armin felt the weight of the choice pressing down harder than ever. "This is where you speak," the stranger said. Armin's chest tightened. "What if it still goes wrong?" he asked. "It might," the stranger admitted. "What if I make it worse?" The stranger didn't look away. "But what if you don't?" they replied. Silence. Thick. Absolute. The younger Armin opened his mouth, closed it. Then, "I think there's an error here," he said. The words echoed. Clear, firm, irreversible. Everything shifted. The room didn't explode into chaos. There was no immediate consequence. Just attention. People looked up. The supervisor walked closer. "Let me see." The document was taken, examined. Another person joined. Then another. Armin watched, barely breathing. "They're noticing," he whispered. "Yes," the stranger said. Minutes seemed to stretch. Voices overlapped. Concern replaced routine. The small error began to unravel into something larger. Connections, inconsistencies, a pattern that hadn't been visible before. Armin felt something inside him crack open. This wasn't just a mistake," he said. "No," the stranger replied. "It never was." The room grew more intense. Names were mentioned, questions raised, and slowly, unmistakably, the direction shifted, away from him, toward the truth. Armin staggered back slightly, overwhelmed. "So I wasn't." "No," the stranger said softly. "You weren't." The confirmation didn't feel like relief. It felt like release. Like something heavy finally letting go. Across the room, his past self stood straighter now, engaged, present, alive in a way Armin hadn't felt in a long time. The moment was no longer slipping away. It was unfolding. "You did it," the stranger said. Armin turned toward them. But something was wrong. The stranger's form was fading, edges dissolving into the air. "Wait," Armin said. "What's happening?" The stranger smiled faintly. The moment has changed, they said. That means his path ends here. Armin felt a sudden urgency. You said you'd disappear. Yes, but I'm not separate from you, the stranger said gently. I'm just a part of you that needed this to happen. Armin shook his head. There has to be another way. The stranger's smile didn't waver. There never was, they said. The room around them grew brighter, sharper, more real. Armin could feel it pulling him in. You're going back, the stranger said. To what? Armin asked. The stranger's eyes met his one last time. To the life where you didn't look away. Their form flickered. Remember this, they added. Not the cold, not the exile. Then what? The stranger's voice softened, almost gone now, the moment you chose to stay. And then they were gone. Armin stood alone, but not in the train car, not in the cold, in the office. Fully, completely. And this time, when he looked down at his hands, they weren't cracked or frozen. They were steady, warm, and the moment had finally passed. The room didn't return to normal all at once. It settled, like dust after something heavy had been moved. Voices continued, sharper now, more urgent. Papers shifted hands. Someone called for additional records. The quiet routine Armin once knew had fractured into focused attention. But for him, everything felt unnaturally clear. Every sound distinct. Every movement precise. As if the world had adjusted its focus. And he was finally seeing it without distortion. Armin. He turned. The supervisor stood beside him, holding the document. The same one that had started it all. You caught this? The man asked. Armin nodded slowly. Yes. The word felt different this time. Not defensive. Certain. The supervisor studied him for a moment, then gave a short nod. Good work, he said, before turning back to the others. Simple words, but they echoed deeper than anything Armin had heard in a long time. Good work. He exhaled quietly, as if releasing something that had been trapped in his chest for days, or maybe longer. The hours that followed moved quickly. What had seemed like a minor inconsistency revealed layers beneath it. Numbers didn't match. Authorizations were out of place. A pattern emerged, subtle, deliberate, not an accident, not a mistake, something planned. Armin stayed involved, answering questions, pointing out details he'd missed before, or perhaps details he had chosen not to see. Each answer grounded him further. Each moment reinforced one simple truth. He was still here, and this time he hadn't stepped aside. By late evening, the office was nearly empty. The energy had shifted from urgency to quiet aftermath. Conversations softened. Chairs returned to their places. The hum of the lights felt less oppressive. Armin stood alone near the table, staring at the same spot where he had once hesitated. It looked smaller now, almost insignificant. And yet, he knew better. Footsteps approached behind him. You handled yourself well today. Armin turned. It was one of the senior auditors, a man known for noticing things others overlooked. I just said what I saw, Armin replied. The auditor gave a slight smile. Most people don't. There was no accusation in his tone, just observation. And somehow, that made it heavier. Armin nodded, absorbing the words. After a brief pause, the auditor continued. There will likely be follow-up questions, formal ones. I understand, Armin said, but the auditor added, you did the right thing. Again, those words, different voice, same weight. The auditor gave him a final look, then walked away. Armin remained where he was, alone, but not isolated, not like before. The difference was subtle, but undeniable. He wasn't waiting for something to happen to him anymore. He had already stepped into it. The building emptied gradually, until only a few lights remained on. Eventually, Armin gathered his things. As he reached for his coat, something caught his attention. On the edge of the table, partially tucked beneath a folder, was a watch. Old, worn, the glass slightly cracked. His breath slowed. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, carefully, he picked it up. It felt solid, real, not like a memory, not like something carried across a frozen wasteland. Just an object, but it meant more than that. He turned it over in his hand. The hands were moving, ticking forward. Steady, alive. Armin stared at it for a long moment. Then, without overthinking, he slipped it into his pocket, not as a reminder of what had happened, but as something quieter, a recognition. The walk home felt unfamiliar in its normalcy. The air was cool but not punishing. The streets carried a low hum of life. Distant voices, passing cars, the rhythm of a world that continued regardless of individual moments. For the first time in what felt like forever, Armin noticed these things, not as background noise, but as part of something he was still connected to. He paused briefly at a corner, watching people move past him, each one carrying their own decisions, their own unnoticed moments. It struck him then, how many of them were standing at a point like he had been, a small hesitation, an easy choice, a path that could split without warning, and how often those moments passed, without being seen. Armin exhaled slowly and continued walking. When he reached his apartment, everything was exactly as he had left it. The same quiet space, the same arrangement, no signs of absence, no trace of exile. And yet, he didn't feel like the same person who had lived there before. He set his keys down and stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle around him. It wasn't empty. It wasn't heavy. It was neutral, open. Armin walked to the window and looked out. The city stretched before him, alive in its quiet way, lights flickering on, people moving, moments unfolding. He reached into his pocket and took out the watch again. Tick, 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 each second clear, each one moving forward, no longer frozen. No more looking away, he murmured. The words weren't dramatic. They didn't need to be. They were simple. And this time that was enough. He placed the watch on the table beside him, not hidden, not forgotten, just present, a small object in a quiet room, but one that marked the difference between two lives. Armin stood there for a while longer, watching the city. Then, finally, he turned away, not because the moment had ended, but because it hadn't. And somewhere in ways he couldn't yet see, it was still continuing. Morning came without resistance. No violent wind. No frost clawing at the edges of breath. Just light, soft, steady, spilling to the window as if it had always been there, waiting. Armin opened his eyes slowly. For a brief second, instinct tightened his chest, expecting cold, expecting the weight of the train car pressing in around him. But there was nothing, only the quiet rhythm of a normal room. He sat up, letting the stillness settle. It wasn't empty anymore. It felt earned. The watch lay on the table, where he had left it. Tick, tick, tick. He watched it for a moment, grounding himself in the sound. Time was moving, and so was he. The following days didn't transform into something extraordinary. There were no sudden rewards, no dramatic reversals. Instead, there was something more subtle. Continuity. The office continued its investigation. Questions were asked, answers examined. The pattern Armin had helped uncover led to consequences, but not for him, for others, for the truth that had been buried beneath small, overlooked details. Each time he was called in, Armin spoke plainly, no hesitation, no softening of what he had seen. And each time, he felt the quiet reinforcement of that same choice, the one he had finally made, to stay, to not look away. Colleagues began to treat him differently, not dramatically, but noticeably. There was a shift in tone, in trust. People asked for his input, waited for his response. It wasn't recognition in the loud sense. It was something steadier, something that built moment by moment. One evening, as the office emptied once again, Armin found himself alone at the same table, the same place where everything had split and then, somehow, come back together. He ran his fingers lightly across the surface. No marks, no sign of the weight it had once carried. But he remembered, not as a burden, as a point of reference. Footsteps approached. He didn't turn immediately this time. "You're still here," a voice said. Armin glanced over his shoulder. It was the same senior auditor. I could say the same, Armin replied. The man smiled faintly and stepped closer. There's something I wanted to ask you, he said. Armin nodded. During that moment, the auditor continued, when you first noticed the inconsistency, what made you speak up? The question lingered. Simple, direct. Armin looked down briefly, then back up. I didn't, he said. The auditor's brow furrowed slightly. Not at first. A quiet pause followed. But then I realized something, Armin added. What? Armin held his gaze. Steady. That the moment doesn't go away just because you ignore it. The auditor studied him for a second longer, then nodded slowly. That's true, he said. No further explanation. None needed. After the auditor left, Armin remained where he was. The room felt calm, complete, but not finished. He reached into his pocket, out of habit now, and took out the watch. Still ticking, always moving. He turned it over in his hand, noticing something he hadn't before. A faint engraving on the back. Worn but visible. One word. Stay. Armin exhaled softly. Not surprised. Just aware. Later that night, back at his apartment, the city stretched out before him once again. Alive. Unfolding. He stood by the window, the watch resting in his palm. He thought about the train car. The cold. The silence that had once defined everything. It didn't feel distant. It didn't feel unreal. It felt like a path. One that had been possible. One that, in some way, he had lived. And yet, he wasn't there anymore. Not because it had been erased, but because something else had taken its place. A different choice. A different direction. Same moment. Different outcome. Armin placed the watch back on the table. This time, he didn't leave it alone. He set a notebook beside it, opened it, and began to write. Not a record of what had happened. Not a justification. Just small things. Things he noticed. Moments that could easily pass unnoticed if he let them. A conversation. A hesitation. A detail that didn't quite fit. Each entry simple. Brief. But intentional. Days turned into weeks. And the habit stayed. Not out of fear. Not out of obligation. But because he understood something now that he hadn't before. Life didn't change in grand, sweeping movements. It shifted in quiet moments. In choices that seemed too small to matter. Until they did. One afternoon, while walking home, Armin paused at a crosswalk. A man beside him hesitated, glancing at something in his hands. A document, slightly crumpled. A small frown. A moment of uncertainty. Armin noticed it immediately, not because it was obvious, but because he had learned to see it. The light changed. People began to move. The man hesitated again. Just for a second. Armin didn't speak, didn't interfere. He simply watched. The man looked back at the paper, then, quietly, stepped out of line and turned back the way he came. A different choice, a different path. Armin felt a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air. Not dramatic, but real. He crossed the street and continued walking. No need to follow. No need to know the outcome. The moment had already done its work. That night, as he stood once more by his window, the watch ticking steadily beside him, Armin allowed himself a small, quiet realization. The knock hadn't been an interruption. It had been an invitation. Not to escape, not to undo everything, but to return to the exact point where everything begins, and choose to stay.